Welcome back to Youth Sports Positive, our second episode. I'm your host, Kelsey Dennehy, with my dad, Mark Dennehy. And Dad, welcome back to the pod. You didn't get fired.
Thanks. I know. I think it's only a matter of time, but no, we got some pretty good responses, Kels, online, and people have reached out. I know you're the sort of social media guru. All I use is LinkedIn, which may be inappropriate, but got a lot of reactions. And then Brian Yandel and Mike Motto were kind enough to have us on Rink Shrinks, or have me on Rink Shrinks. You'll be on next time, and hopefully that brings us to people's attention. And yeah, we think we've got something important to talk about, and the more the merrier. So, for those of you that are listening out there, welcome aboard. And yeah, episode number 2, Kels.
Yeah, we're like we said in our first episode, our goal with this podcast is to bring the work hard, have fun mentality back to youth sports. And we gave kind of an introduction in our first episode. So if you haven't listened to that, you can find that where all of the rest of our content is on our website, youthsportspositive.com. But today we thought it would be a good idea to really do a dive into some of the heavy hitter topics that we're going to get into over the coming weeks, and give you a little bit of a sneak peek into what those are going to look like. So, Dad, I think you're locked and loaded, ready to go in terms of what we are wanting to talk about today. And I think the first one that I think we're ready to tackle is the business of youth sports, and how much it has really turned into a moneymaker more than a life skills developer.
Yeah, and listen, you can accomplish more than one thing. One of the things is, as we move forward with future episodes, we're going to touch on these topics that we're about to talk about in more depth. And what we also hope to do is to bring on some experts in the field. But I've got some pretty strong opinions on the business of youth sport. As I like to say, at one point I thought the business was recession proof. Come to understand that youth sports, the business of youth sports, is also pandemic proof. Um, I personally believe that youth sports is an incredible business. I don't think that it's great for the development piece. It's something that I feel pretty strongly about. But there's a number of topics we want to talk about, and we're going to bring in some qualified speakers on those subjects. Probably first and foremost is the club versus community. And listen, the cat's out of the bag. I don't see us ever going back per se to the community piece, but I think we also have to understand and come to grips with the fact that where we are as a society, and you look at the breakdown maybe in communities, I think it may start with youth sports, where, when I was growing up, you played for your town, and there really weren't any other options. Um, Adults figured out a way to monetize this, and they do a great job of selling it to parents whose fear of missing out motivates them to put their kids in club sports. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about the data, which really doesn't lean one way or the other. But like I said, once you monetize something, so for instance, you've got an organization, a private organization who's running a sports team. Um, their number one job, if it's their business, is to make money. That's capitalism at its finest, and I have no problem with capitalism. Um, the problem is if the development of the person gets in the way of the making of the money. The making of the money is always going to take precedence. That's just the way it is.
Right.
And so, I think too often these life lessons we talk about, this community building that we talk about, kind of gets lost when you're dealing with club organizations. Um, but it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Um, you can tell, Kels, you can tell the story of your tryout with a club hockey team. Do you remember?
A little bit. I mean, I never formally played any club sports. We were very much a town team family. I think if I had really expressed a want and interest in doing it that we maybe would have, but there was never a push for me to do that for my hockey development. Um, what?
Well, there was one year though that a number of your teammates
Yes, I,
were trying out for a
yep.
local club team, and again, I think you get a sense from me where what my opinion was, and I think you're almost afraid to ask me if you could try out. Do you remember?
Well, I do remember because it was for me, sports was a very big social component to my life. So when I heard through the grapevine that 6 or 7 of my teammates that I had played with since I was 4 were trying out for these club teams, and the club team was the place to be, and it was where all the best players were going, this, that, the other, I was kind of like, oh, is that what I need to be doing? But also, oh, all of my friends are going to leave
That's
and
right.
I have no friends. And that's why I'm playing. That's why I enjoy this sport, is because I get to do it with my friends. So I think that was the biggest component, but also just a wanting to fit in and be with the group. And so because we had really done everything together in terms of hockey since we were little, so it was difficult, I think. And I remember being very upset when I found out that this many people were potentially making the jump. And so I did end up trying out for this club team.
Yeah. So fast go back in time. Mom brought it to my attention that you were a little nervous to come to me, and I said, "Listen, if you want to try out for the club team, you're more than welcome. We'll do this." And so we took you to the rink, and you were involved in tryouts. And I happened to know the coach at the time who was coaching the team, um, and like you said, there were 7 or 8 of your friends that were trying out. So of course I'm standing there on the glass with their parents, and so some of the differences between community based and club based is obviously a club costs more, and which is one of the reasons
Costs
that
a
that it
lot of money.
it costs a lot more, and that is hurting certain sports. I'm a big hockey guy, and that hockey's always been expensive. It's never been more expensive than it is now. Um, the travel is more, so again, that jacks up costs. They play in all these tournaments. Um, I like to say one of my favorite sayings is, we travel further, we pay more, and we develop fewer. Um, but I just
True.
remember standing there in the glass with these parents, and I'm looking at them, and I said to a couple of them, listen, you know, the only reason I'm here is because your daughters are here, and my daughter wants to play with your daughter. Do we really want to be traipsing all over New England when we could just play in our town? And we got good coaches. We're lucky enough to have good coaches. Long story short, I think we convinced probably 6 out of the 8
Yeah.
parents that their kids should stay. And then the reality is, all the kids that left for this greener pasture, when it came time for high school hockey, they all came back. So they all ended up in the same place.
And
Um,
it's funny to think about too the outcomes of people who played club hockey versus who didn't. Just in terms of like overall outcome. Like it really didn't make that big of a difference besides some of the girls who we played with when we were young who ended up going Division 1.
yep.
And there was nobody in that group that was going Division 1.
Yeah.
So,
So listen, it's a topic we're going to cover, and we're going to cover it with some depth. And maybe what we can do too is maybe put up a poll with all of these topics, and anybody that wants to can kind of rank them, and maybe that'll help us kind of figure out which ones we want to cover first. Um,
well,
Academies now are popping up all over the place. It started with IMG out of Florida, which was strictly tennis and golf. Now they do a number of sports. There's a number of hockey academies now in the New England area, and again, you know, this isn't necessarily growing the sport. So clubs and academies aren't necessarily growing the sport. The learn to skates is still being run by the community endeavors. What they do is they just come in and they just scrape off the top. They just come in and take players from that. Um, And so academies are something that are becoming more popular, where basically you go to a training facility and you alternate being on the ice or in the batting cages or whatever your
It's like
sport
going to
is.
summer camp, but all the time.
Correct, correct. Um, and then another topic is, do you know what a tournication is, Kels?
Yeah, it's people who turn their kids' sports tournaments into a family vacation. And that's what they do for family vacation that year because they're so expensive that that's all they can afford to do. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they can afford to do other things, but they're going to all of these places. They might as well make their family's time useful for the kids because there's a lot of kids too that we forget that are just being traipsed around. They're not playing these sports, they're not doing what their siblings are doing, they're just there because they're not getting a babysitter for the weekend. Mom and dad aren't leaving them behind.
Yeah,
And my sister was definitely one of those for a long time, just because she wasn't old enough to play sports. But we also didn't, we were not tournication people. We did one hockey tournament a year and it was this big, it was fun because we did it once a year. It was exciting. And
yeah.
that was it.
And listen, I think one of the great parts of sports, and in particular ice hockey, is that you spend a lot of time with your family. And so the time in the car with you and your sisters and mom were wonderful times.
Oh, yeah.
But literally, they are now building facilities to host these tournaments. And at the end of the day, they've got to sell people on the idea that you need to do these all the time. Again, I know hockey better than most sports, but I talk to experts in other sports as well.
Think about
Um,
basketball. That's a big one.
yeah, soccer, lacrosse. I mean, they play in these showcase tournaments every weekend during the summer. Like those are thousands of dollars that you're spending if you can afford to do it. And some families can't afford to do it for all their kids. And so, like you said, they might have three kids, and one of their kids they think might um, have the ability or interest to move on, and they can afford to pay for that one child, and then they're traipsing the other two around. Which so these are things we'll talk about. What's next, Kels? What's next on
I
the
think I
slate
was
of?
going to say, I think that's a good transition into our next topic because with how expensive and how clicky sports are nowadays, it's turning and but this isn't the only reason. There's probably a bigger reason. It's turning a lot of people to specializing their kids in one sport at a really young age instead of playing multiple sports all the way through.
Yep.
Um, and there's it's kind of crazy to me that people are still doing this because there is so much science out there into how detrimental it is to do that to kids. I mean, kids as young as 5, 6, 7, 8 are being specialized into one sport that they are doing all of the time, and it's a lot. I remember it being a lot, and I didn't play hockey year round. I mean, it like I played when it was the time for the season, and I trained in the off season in high school, but that was really it.
So again, I go back to my recommendation last week of start with why. Why you're putting a child in a sport, I think, can really set you up for success or failure. A lot of times, sports specialization comes with a little bit of early success, and now they feel like, all right, this is my child's sport. As someone that coached collegiately and recruited collegiately at the Division I level, and then also scouted at the NHL level, I can tell you it's hard enough to figure out who's going to be good at 18 years old, let alone 6 or 8 years old. That's number one. Number two, um, sports specialization, playing something year round can really take the fun out of it. I reminisce with friends of mine, and one of the things I'm saddest about is, I remember when September or October rolled around and it became hockey season again. I was excited to get back in the rink. With some of the kids that you see that are playing 12 months a year, they don't have that same level of excitement. And I was just as excited to play football in the fall or wiffle ball and baseball in the spring. So you lose some of that passion when you commit to something that early. So there's two books, and they're in different directions. One called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. and it references something called the 10,000 hours rule.
Hmm.
And we can talk about that in more depth, but it's really been bastardized. It's actually Erickson's 10,000 hours law or rule. And then the other book is called The Sports Gene, Gene,
Good
by
book.
I think David Epstein. And kind of back and forth. One is, if you train for something long enough, you can be an expert. And the other book is basically, listen, genetics play the biggest role in any sort of athletic success. Um, it's probably a combination for the elite athletes, but sports specialization, it does not help the case. It has not proven to be a better path to elite. Um, and the reality is, you need to have a genetic component as well. And then another part of this whole multi-sport versus sports specialization, and you talked about it, Kels. I know that Mass General Hospital has started to chart Tommy John surgeries on teenagers,
Oh, it's
um,
insane.
or hip surgeries on teenage goaltenders. Your body can only do something so many times before it breaks down. So if you specialize too early, and I take your cues from the pros. I remember watching a special on the Manning brothers, and I might have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure Archie Manning, who was an NFL quarterback, didn't let Eli and Peyton play organized football until middle school. It might have even been high school. Now,
That makes
listen,
sense.
they threw a football, they played catch, they played other sports, but he didn't want to start them too early for fear of A, probably injuries, and B, burning them out. So, multi sports versus sports specialization. Um, the best athletes I've ever been around, the best hockey players I've ever been around, were usually the shortstops in baseball and the quarterbacks in football. They were multi-sport athletes. There's a great story in Edina right now, Edina, Minnesota. A young man by the name of Mason West is a
I was just
Chicago
going to say,
Blackhawk.
we talked about him last episode.
Yeah, there you go. So you can tell the story, Kels. I mean, I just sent you a clip.
Well, that was our positive play. My positive play of our first episode was the fact that he was drafted to the NHL, first round draft pick, incredibly talented hockey player, but he had already committed to his team to play high school football. He's their quarterback. And so he said, "Okay, I'm going to play quarterback. That was my commitment." He threw what was it, for 5 touchdown passes in his first game, and I believe he did it again in a playoff game this past week. So
He either threw or ran, so he was involved in 5 touchdowns in the state semifinals.
yeah.
And this is a guy who, like you said, was a first round draft pick with the Chicago Blackhawks this summer. So it's not a mistake. This young man has obviously genetics on his side, but he also has discipline, and he's worked at his craft. And I think that I can tell you right now, when I went and watched him play, I remember my notes. He passes the puck on the ice like a quarterback passes in football. He reads the ice and he gets it to the right guy. And so a lot of times these sports can benefit you. I remember with Keelan, who started hockey. Remember, she quit for a while and then she came back and she played.
My
But
sister.
the fact that she played soccer, she understood a lot of the concepts. So even though she might have been behind a little bit athletically, she understood the game itself, and that allowed her to catch up.
Yeah, it is really cool to see now that professional athletes who are very great at what they do are a outcome of multi sports, have played multiple sports, and that'll come in. That's one of my positive plays of the week this week. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But part of youth sports, a big part of youth sports, I think that people that kind of gets overlooked, but sometimes also a little bit too analyzed, is coaches. And,
Yeah,
and I
go.
think about the coaches I had growing up. I loved my coaches growing up, and most of them did play hockey, but they just wanted us to have fun and get better. And there was never really a ton of pressure when we were young to, like, there was no playing time. There was none of that. It was when we were 8, we were all playing and all doing, they would give us tips, but like there was no pressure.
No, they'd teach you your positions a little bit, and we would practice different situations, two-on-ones and breakouts and stuff like that. But for the most part, they rolled the lines. If they did shorten the bench, it was at the end of the game, and it wasn't something that you would even notice.
Right.
They didn't put power plays together. Listen, I'm not kumbaya. I'm not everyone should get a trophy. That's not my point.
Never,
But
never.
but I can tell you this. Um, there's winning and there's development. Sometimes they go hand in hand. Oftentimes, at younger levels, they don't. Right. So listen, wanting to win and working to win is something that should be taught without a doubt. I think it's part of it for sure. But at the youth hockey level, it shouldn't be win at all costs. Right. There should
No.
be a developmental piece to this in every sport. And so, one of the things that I want to talk about, because I get these questions from parents all the time, is what should I look for in a coach? And so that is something like are your children learning life lessons? Are they what are the practices like? Are they in motion? Are they standing around looking at a board? Is it important to have what's the coach's resume?
When they're 8,
Yeah, no,
nothing,
no, no. But my point is, people want a coach that understands the sport they're coaching, right?
which that's valid.
Yeah, it is, but there are a lot of guys, men and women, that played the game that aren't very good at coaching it.
There's
That's
a difference. It's not a direct path.
yeah. And now there's skills coaches and there's strength coaches and there's nutritionists and all that stuff, and sort of when to bring them into a young person's life. There's obviously value for it, but when do you need it? How do you assess a coach? You like to use winning and losing, um, but at the end of the day, it's usually the players that win or lose a game. The coach is there to give some structure and hold and set a standard and then hold people accountable to that standard. Um, I look at the behavior of certain coaches behind a bench in youth sports, and this is something as a former Division I college coach is really disturbing to me. Um, you wouldn't let your boss scream at you at work. Coaches shouldn't be screaming at the players on the bench. That's not a very good learning environment.
Especially
Um,
when they're in the developmental stages. Like, we're talking about kids. We're not talking about professional players. We're talking about
correct, correct. But I would say, for these young aspiring coaches, watch professional coaches, right? If you're watching football, watch Bill Belichick, or if
that's
you're
not a good
watching.
example right now.
No, I know it's not a winning example right now, but when do you see him yelling at his players? He rarely did, if at all, right? Scott Bowman, for hockey fans behind the bench, they're very composed. Your work is done in practice. If you're screaming and yelling on the bench, then you're not a very good coach because your players aren't that prepared. So, that's something that I look for when, that's something that I wanted for you guys. I wanted to watch your coaches and see what their interactions were with the younger players. Tell you a quick story, and then we can move on to the next topic. I remember going to Caroline's game once, and I knew the coach. I had helped him out in the past, but they were kids. It might have been U10 hockey,
Right.
and he's trying to get the girls ready for a game. It's like herding fleas, trying to get them to stop talking and stand up and get ready for the game. And he finally gets them up, and he says, "All right, girls, what do I always say?" And I'm thinking he's gonna, they're gonna say, hustle or shoot the puck, or they all scream, "Don't run with scissors." And he's like, "That's right, go out and get them." And I just got a real kick out of that. First of all, it's a great
That's
life lesson. Don't run with
awesome.
scissors. These are 9 and 10-year-old girls. Like he just getting them on the same page. They had a laugh, and if they're going to have success, it's going to be because their team's better than the other team. So I do think that coaches are really important. I think they can be some of the best teachers on the planet. But what stage, what level someone's coaching, their mannerisms, their resume, um, that all comes into play. And I think that's something that we'll probably spend some time talking about.
Well, and I think too, quickly before we move on, watching a coach and how they interact with their players, not only is that, I guess, detrimental or impactful to the player they're interacting with, but think about everybody else on the team that is watching and ingesting that interaction. If you're screaming at your kids constantly, that's a message to their teammates that that's okay to do when you're working with somebody. That's okay to do when you're frustrated and need to communicate a message. And in
Yep.
reality, that's going to get you nowhere. Zero. So I think that that is something that I try to think about um, working with kids, but also just like in general in life. That's you're preparing them to be a functional human being in society. And at the end of the day, youth sports, that's what it is. And
That's a
some
good,
what?
it's a great point, Kelson. When we get to the positive plays of the week and we talk about some of the organizations I want to bring attention to, um, I worked with a gentleman who was a former Marine platoon special forces commander, and he said, when you're screaming at your players to do things, then when the going gets tough, they look to you, and it's not an intuitive or instinctual action. What good leaders do is they prepare their people so that when the going gets tough, it's already within them, right? Failure to train, is a recipe for disaster. So, yeah, if you're yelling at your team and they're looking to you, then your team's in trouble.
Yeah, it is. And I guess that kind of transitions us a little bit to our next topic, the NCAA and recruitment, because it's a little bit of a like it's starting to get younger and younger, really, but it's inherently supposed to be for the older kids who are wanting to play in college and all of that. But that I think has gotten I very vividly remember I was in I was in my freshman year of high school, and a girl signed verbally committed to a school that she was going to play at. And I remember the posting, the like you posted on your Instagram, and it's this whole big to do, and everyone's yada yada yada, congratulations. What people don't realize is that's a verbal commitment. That means zip, nothing. If they get hurt, if they digress, they get worse as a player, they're not going to play at that school. And then people forget about it. And then down the line, it's always interesting to see, okay, did they actually go play at that school? And the majority of the people I saw post those things actually didn't end up playing where they committed to.
So there's a number of things you're talking about there, and I'll try to pick off one at a time. The recruitment of younger players has tapered down a little bit. More recently, there's been some NCAA legislation that is pulled back on that. I think the fact that kids can transfer now without any hesitation, the fact that they can change their minds, I think, is making teams less apt to make these commitments. Um, the other part of it is, you talk about life lessons. What type of life lessons are we teaching young people if if they think that making a commitment is something that you don't have to keep, right? There's no such thing as a decommitment. That is not a word, right? You're either committed or you're not committed. And you talked about it's meaningless. Well, a verbal commitment is only meaningless if one of the two parties doesn't honor it.
Right.
A verbal commitment should have meaning. It should have standing. Um, but because it's becoming more and more common for schools to walk away from players, or players who maybe elevate their game to walk away from schools, we as a society have accepted that as okay. Well, it wasn't a real commitment. So, that's part of it. But we can talk about things like Division 1 sports, Division 3 sports, club sports, how it's all going to play, what
NIL.
level NIL, what level's right for you, and how do you know? The recruiting process isn't perfect, but the results, water finds its own level. the pay-to-play piece. You talked about the NIL, and then also the transfer portal. I've got some pretty controversial beliefs or beliefs on this front. I grew up in a blue-collar town, pretty heavily union, and so I'm more often than not I support the workers. Um, and to me, the players are the workers. And so if you're going to hold the 18-year-old kids who are making these commitments to a higher standard than you're holding the coaches, I'm going to have a problem with you. But the reality is that a lot of what's going on in youth sports is because of the dollars that are being spent at the NCAA level, and there's a lot of money. There's millions, billions in basketball and football, and unfortunately, I think that is trickled down, and it's affecting and directing some of the decisions we're making with youth sports. But that'll be a topic that we cover. That's probably going to be more than one show, though, and we can
Oh,
probably break that up. A couple others real quick. We can talk about. We touched upon it briefly. Elite athletes, nurture and nature. Again, I point you back to the Sports Gene with David Epstein. He also wrote a book called Range, which is excellent. Versus outliers. Go ahead, Kel. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you haven't already picked up, my dad is a big book reference person. So we do have a segment for this, but that doesn't matter. I think we should start like a book counter or like a reference counter of how many times during our episodes that you are saying, well, there's a book about this, and it's great. Lots of references. That's what we're trying to do here. But I thought I should point that out because now people can keep tabs on it and see just how many times we talk about it.
I'm just creating more work for you when you put the notes in so that there's book titles and
yeah, right.
A couple other topics, parents' behavior, which and then I think that goes hand in hand with referees. At the end, I know we're going to do a sort of our books. I've got a podcast, not that we should be directing you to another podcast, but if you listen to podcasts, I've got a really good one for you. And the first season of it talks about refereeing. But I mean, those are topics we're gonna touch upon. But
parents is a big one. Parents is a big one. That's one I see a lot in my job, even just covering college, high school athletics, is the involvement of parents. And I talk to a lot of parents, and I have a lot of thoughts on that one too. It blows my mind, the behavior that comes out of some of these parents. And it's a great learning lesson for my generation in kind of how we don't want to be as parents with our kids in youth sports. Because just like the business side of it, the parental involvement is getting a little crazy.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to the investment that they make with their time and also the investment they're making with dollars. And it's what they're trying to get out of it. But again, there are some positives, and we want to keep this youth sport positive. There are some wonderful stories about parents, and when we get to that segment,
that it's great to promote them because that's the behavior that we should be seeing.
That's right. So let's get to segment 2, Kels.
Positive play of the week.
Yeah.
What you got?
So this is Veterans Day was this past Monday, and in recognition of that, I've got three websites that I would like to bring to people's attention. And I think you want to talk about positive, the sports academies, the service academies in the United States are wonderful educators of men and women, and they develop some of our greatest leaders. And so there's three websites, three organizations that I want to bring to people's attention. Number one is the Massachusetts Soldiers Legacy Fund. And they have their own website, Massachusetts Soldiers Legacy Fund. It was started by a gentleman by the name of Peter Travato. Peter played for me at UMass. For his senior project, he created this foundation, and I think they've raised about $4.5 million. Awesome. And this was in 2003, I think it was founded, and it was to raise money for the children of Massachusetts soldiers who passed away in either Afghanistan or Iraq. It's a great foundation. This is something that started because of a hockey player. Massachusetts Soldiers Legacy Fund is one. The Derek Hines Unsung Hero Award. He also has a memorial foundation. Derek was a hockey player as well, went to St. John's Prep, and then on to West Point. He's a 2003 graduate of West Point. I don't know if he was the captain there, but he was a good player. And I know that the commissioners of Division I college hockey have a Derek Hines Unsung Hero Award. He also has a memorial fund, and they have a road race for him. I want to bring his sacrifice to people's awareness. If you go to Derek Hines, HINES fund.com, you can donate. They say that sports don't always define character, but they highlight it. Derek was someone of the highest character. So in this Veterans Day week, I want to remember him. And then lastly is a company called The Program. You can go to theprogram.org. It was founded by a good friend of mine, Eric Kapitulik, former Marine Special Forces platoon leader. It's a really neat organization. Their mission is to develop great teammates and leaders in order to create world-class teams. When I coached at Merrimack College, I brought him in 8 years in a row to work with my team. And he has a couple, one thing called Judgment Day, where he comes in for 2 days and puts your players through the rigors of basic training for a couple hours each day.
I remember those.
Yeah, he really identifies leaders, and I learned more from him watching him put my players through their paces. So he's done a great job of identifying leaders and also helping to shape leaders. Those are three things for me that I'd like to bring to people's attention in today's podcast.
Yeah, all of those are great. And I think, very timely for Veterans Day, but also important reminder to people of the characters and morals around sports that are really important, and that these are the type of people that sports are developing. And these are great examples of great people. And their services we're obviously very appreciative of. I have it's more of a like recent times positive play of the week. The Pats are on a roll. Another big win on Thursday, and I saw a tweet from Jeff Darlington that I wanted to share with everybody because it cracked me up. It was an NBC Sports Boston graphic, and it was a picture of Nick Saban and his offensive coordinator at the time at Alabama, Steve Sarkisian. They were at Drake May's basketball game in Myers Park. So when they were recruiting him, they were on a recruiting trip, and they went and watched him play basketball. And what a cool thing for young people to see in how important being a multi-sport athlete is. And that's what I alluded to earlier when we were talking about it. And so Darlington asked Drake May after the game what his advice to young athletes is. And he said, play as many sports as you can. I can't tell you how much baseball and basketball has helped me in playing quarterback. We talked about it with Mason West. Drake May, a lot of people look up to him right now. A lot of people love watching him, myself included.
Especially in New England, Kels, but you got to at least admit some bias.
Okay, and that's totally fair. That's totally fair. But I just thought it was an interesting, with somebody who is so influential right now, to be saying that, I think is very telling. So I will link that in our show notes and our website as well, so people can go check it out. Because
it's a great photo. You sent it to me. It's a great photo. It's really neat to see those two for the football coaches behind him. Obviously, they're trying to recruit him, but the fact that he's a 5-star recruit for football and he's continuing to play basketball, I think that's awesome. I think that's really good. So we're going to finish up with this week's playbook. What do you got for us?
So I was kind of, and I do this during the day usually, is I just kind of go deep in the delves of, I usually just look up youth sports news, and see if I can find anything new. And I stumbled upon a New York Times article that was released this summer. And it's called Youth Sports Are a $40 billion Business. Private Equity is Taking Notice. And it's by Joe Drape and Ken Belson. And I think since we're in the inaugural stages of our podcast and kind of just doing the introductions and kind of hinting at different subjects that we're going to touch on throughout our podcast, I thought this was a great article to recommend. It's an eye opener. It takes you through multiple different families' experiences in youth sports. It gives you numbers of how much they're spending, how much it's worth economically. And it was pretty eye-opening, even for me now, who I feel like I do a lot of reading on youth sports now with the podcast, and just it's an interest of mine in general and working in sports. That I thought that was a great informational piece, but also put a lot of things into perspective.
Yeah, it's a great article. And you talk about the business of sports. It is a multi-billion-dollar business. It's not going anywhere. So how can we do it better? I think is hopefully something we concentrate on when we cover that topic. Before I forget, I'm sporting a Boston Police Department hockey sweatshirt here, courtesy of John O'Toole. I don't know if he has a website or not, but he's made some pretty good gear, and I traded him some stuff. So I really like this. My playbook, my week's playbook is, I told you it's a podcast. Big fan of Mike Lewis. Michael Lewis wrote Liar's Poker. He wrote Moneyball. He wrote The Big Short. He's got a podcast called Against the Rules. The first season is about refereeing. The second season is about, I believe, coaches. It's excellent. It really is. I think it's a must listen to. And so I recommend Against the Rules, the Michael Lewis podcast, to anybody out there listening. And not that Kelsey needs more work, but she is the executive producer, the director, and the talent. She'll make sure that these articles, the Twitter feeds, the links are all up on our website so that you can go to the website. What's our website again, Kels?
Our website is youthsportspositive.com. You can just look up Youth Sports Positive in your search engine and it should come up. You beat me to it. I was going to plug that I would have everything linked. I'm a big links person. I always look in like the show notes of things and people's bios and all that for links. So we will have just the same. Everything that we talk about in our podcast is going to be linked. And with that, our social media is also linked. It's on Instagram at Youth Sports Positive, on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, Youth Sports Pause. And we just made a TikTok as well at Youth Sports Positive. So you can find us on all of the different social medias. We'll post clips of our podcast so you don't miss any of it. And then we are also obviously in the introductory stages of this podcast. So the technical things we're still working through, but we will.
I finally got my camera centered, so I'm not all over the place.
Yeah, we spent about 10 minutes before filming, working that one out. I was reading the directions off of Google. But so bear with us there. But anything else that you want to mention?
So do we want to put a poll up of the topics that we listed and have people just check off the one they want first, or not? Is that too much work?
The power of social media. Everybody has a comment section. So if you have an opinion, if you have something that you want us to talk about, or you want something within what we mentioned to be talked about more, if you want to see somebody specific on our podcast, let us know. We have a contact button on our website, but also feel free to give us a comment on any of our socials, a DM, however you can reach us. We are happy to take any feedback because we want this to be as beneficial to as many people as possible.
Awesome. Great, Kels. Fantastic. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube, give us a like, give us a comment. It helps us keep doing this and definitely gives us some good ideas. And at the end of the day, do something to bring the work hard, have fun mentality back to the youth sports or the youth in your life, because that's what this podcast is all about. So with that, signing off for my dad, Mark Dennehy, I'm Kelsey Dennehy. Thanks for
So
tuning in.
I'm going to start a trend here. I'm going to
Oh,
say work hard.
okay. And I'm going to say have fun.
There you go.
We'll see you next week.